Well, we just celebrated St. Patrick's Day. But who was St. Patrick really? What did he do? What did he believe? And what did he teach? Welcome to another exciting episode of Love Not Fear. I'm Jack Cox, author of Love Not Fear, and I'm here on my own tonight. So you're going to put up with me waffling on about St. Patrick. We're supposed to believe that he is the patron saint of Ireland, a man of great piety who eradicated snakes from the island and had a fondness for shamrock. We're even supposed to believe some BS about him converting all the pagans, although there are still plenty of pagans in Ireland and around the world, thank goodness. Indeed, have you ever wondered how many of the stories about him are really true? How many have been embellished or complete bloody fiction? Well, in today's episode, we're going to be looking into some of those stories and try to find out the reality behind St. Patrick. St. Patrick's Day is a well-recognised holiday around the world, celebrated in mid-March, March the 17th. It's taken on a festive feel of partying. Popular themes include drinking Guinness, the three-leaved clover, leprechauns, and corned beef, wherever corned beef comes from. I've no idea. I don't think they had corned beef in his day. Maybe they did. I don't know. Do any of those things have anything at all to do with Patrick? There are only two authentic sources with information about Patrick, which actually tell the story of his lifetime. And those are written by the man himself while he was living in Ireland. The first is an undated letter called the Epistola, because Epistola is Latin for letter. It was essentially a letter of excommunication addressed to King Coroticus, an Irish chieftain, and to his soldiers who had attacked a number of Irishmen that Patrick had just converted to Christianity and carried them off into slavery. So in the letter, Patrick criticizes and excommunicates the soldiers. The second, rather more lengthy document is called the Confessio, because confessio is Latin for confession. Patrick wrote this in his old age as some kind of autobiography. So, was St. Patrick Irish? Oh, you got to be kidding me now. No, he was born in Roman Britain. His given name was Maywen Sucat. Maywen Sucat. Sounds rather Welsh, doesn't it? Patrick was born in the 4th century. The date 385 CE is sometimes given, but nobody really knows. Some accounts put him in Scotland, others in Wales. We know the name of the town where he was born, the Latin name for the town, Banaventa Bernay. But we have no idea where that was. He was captured by Irish raiders, so it must have been somewhere close to the west coast. He claims to have been British, which to my mind rules out Scotland, because Scotland is north of Hadrian's Wall, which delineated the province of Britannia. Of course, Wales didn't exist then either. The Celtic tribes were just to call themselves Britons, but thought of themselves as Britons. And all Patrick ever said was he was a Briton. His parents, Calpurnius and Conchessa, were probably Romans, judging by the name. Third-generation Christians, by some accounts, living in Britain, in charge of some Roman colony, or possibly some kind of of local official. Calpurnius is thought to have been a deacon, and Pontius, Patrick's grandfather, was some kind of priest. The exact dates of his birth and death are unclear, but he most likely lived in the 4th century, possibly the early 5th century. Some people even put him as late as the 6th century. The estimate is based on references that he made in his confession to events that happened in Roman Britain at that time, and on his writing style. In particular, some 4th century religious texts he seems to have been referencing. So what does Patrick actually tell us? Well, he said he came from a fairly well-off family, that his father had a small estate and kept slaves. At about the age of 16, he was captured by Irish raiders, as we've said, rounded up with thousands of others and taken into slavery in Ireland. Patrick wrote that he saw his enslavement as some kind of punishment from God for not being a good enough Christian. But he also attributed this period of his life to his religious awakening. Maybe he had some contact with the Druids. He didn't consider himself to be well educated at all, calling himself unlearned in the Epistola. He blamed his lack of education in part on him being very young when he was taken into slavery, such as learning to read and write, which he taught himself later. St. Patrick's education seemed to be confined to religious teachings. Apparently he studied under a French bishop. We're not sure of his name. And Patrick was eventually ordained into the Catholic Church. Still, lack of any formal education embarrassed St. Patrick, who is believed to have taught himself to read and write beyond the basic Latin. Latin, of course, would have been his native tongue. In his writings, he references St. Augustine quite a bit, who was his contemporary, just a little bit older than him. Whilst in Ireland as a slave, he worked as a shepherd. Now, where exactly he was is unknown, although he speaks of mountains being nearby. And one day, according to him, one day he had a dream that he would soon be able to return home. And a few days later, he had another dream. He dreamt of a ship in a port some 200 miles away, in an area that he did not know. He didn't really know his way around Ireland at all, just working as a shepherd. And it was shortly after this that, emboldened by his dream, he escaped from his slave master, who he had been with for 6 years, and began the long journey back to Britain. So how much of this story is true, you have to decide for yourselves. We don't tell people what to think on this channel, but some of it may have been embellished later on, or total fiction, who knows. But according to him, when he reached the coast, the boat was about to leave, but he was refused passage. The pagan sailors clearly saw Christians, especially Roman Christians, as a threat to their traditional way of life. They saw them as invaders, which indeed they were. However, the sailors eventually relented. After all, he was very young, and after 6 years in slavery, he was probably pretty scrawny, and they probably didn't think he was much of a threat. Probably thought it might be a laugh. So the voyage lasted just 3 days. And for some reason that we're not told, that was then followed by 28 days on foot through what Patrick called a desert. And this may have been in Britain or even the western side of Gaul. The journey was so long and difficult that the group ran out of food. Patrick claims, and it may be a later embellishment, that the group asked him to pray for help. One can imagine the mockery in their voices. Ah, go on, Paddy. You pray to your God for help. Go on. However, he claims in the confession that when he did so, a herd of pigs appeared, which the men were then able to kill and eat. And as a result, he went up in their estimation. Anyway, perhaps that was just coincidence, or maybe Patrick had picked up some shamanic skills from the Druids, who knows. Another 14 days go by with him walking in the desert. I mean, it's not a tropical desert, obviously, just a barren place, a wilderness. And just as their food was about to run out again, they reached some kind of civilization where he was quickly recaptured. He's not having a good day, is he? He's not having a good time. He claims that after 60 days he was released. Maybe he was too much trouble, but he provided no details of how this happened. But it took him several years, apparently, before he found his family again. He went on to become a deacon like his father, although he doesn't explain when or where his training occurred. And when he was about 45, he was charged with some unknown wrongdoing that he committed 30 years earlier. I wonder what that was. But apparently the case was tried in his absence because he'd already buggered off back to Ireland. He claimed to be a bishop by this time, although again he gives no details of any training or promotion. He was probably self-appointed because by this time he'd formed his own breakaway religion. More on this in a minute. He thought he had a mission to spread Christianity in Ireland. Indeed, he tried to bully the local Druids out of existence. One story is told, and we mentioned this a month ago in the Imolg show that we did. The one story is told of how one dark February night on Tara Hill, as the High King and his Druids were celebrating Imolg, an unprecedented thing happened. Imagine, if you will, all the flames of all the fires in Ireland had been put out. Only stars were alight in the night sky. They were gathered for a sacred ritual on Tower Hill, in which the Druid priests and priestesses would light the beacon fire on Tower Hill. And all the other beacon fires around the land would be lit when the High King's fire was seen. So it had always been, demonstrating Ireland's dependence on its king and the king's dependence on the gods. So we were a wee bit of a shock when miles to the northeast, on top of the hill of Slane, a different fire was lit before the High King's. What blasphemy! Who was this brash upstart? Well, you've guessed it, he was no other than St. Patrick, who was attempting to rival the authority of the king and his Druids. But Patrick was a foreigner in their land. He should have respected the local traditions and the religion of the indigenous people. The man was clearly a bigot. Christianity, while having a huge influence in Britain and Gaul, was not to have much of a foothold in Ireland until the 12th century. The Irish didn't want it. So according to his confession, Patrick's work included ordaining clergy and baptizing many thousands of men and women all over Ireland. Nevertheless, his actions seem to have attracted some criticism in his homeland, for he admits that one of the reasons that he wrote his confession was in defense against charges that he had been using his position for personal gain. Patrick had indeed fallen out with the Roman Catholic Church and become the founder leader of the Celtic Church, which was very much at odds with the teachings of the Catholics. Now, this is when he wrote his Epistola. Patrick was homesick for Britain and his family and for his friends in Gaul, which may suggest that he trained as a deacon in Gaul, if indeed he ever did. Despite this, he believed that it was God's will that he stay on the island until his death, and that all his missionary efforts would be in vain if he left. Forget it, wouldn't he? Later works, written during the 7th century, have asserted that he died in Northern Ireland. Indeed, there's a tombstone to St. Patrick in Downpatrick in Northern Ireland. But this only dates the 20th century, probably to attract pilgrims to the area to spend some dosh. So what about the snakes? Did Paddy really banish them all from Ireland? Well, much of Britain and Ireland's flora and fauna arrived here after the last ice age. As the glaciers retreated about 10,000 years ago, animals and plants were able to recolonize in the mainland, to which Britain was connected by a land bridge. The Irish Sea, though, provided too big an obstacle for the 3 British species of snakes: grass snake, smooth snake, and adder, that had made it to Britain. So Ireland remained snake-free. One reptile did make it through, however, and is now Ireland's only reptile, the common lizard. Looks like they were a bit quicker than the snakes. But sorry, Paddy, not your doing, mate. Nothing to do with you. The banishing of the snakes, of course, is a bit like the slaying of the dragon in St. George's myth. It's an analogy for getting rid of the pagans. But of course, Patrick didn't manage that either. There's still lots and lots of good pagans in Ireland. So we're supposed to believe, it's come down to us through the Catholic Church, that Patrick was a Catholic bishop, and he brought the doctrine of the Trinity to the people of Ireland. He became so renowned that the Catholic Church made him a saint. None of that's true. Nothing. It's all made up. Most of what's being taught now about St. Patrick didn't even surface for another 500 years after he snuffed it. It was the Catholic priest, Jocelyn, writing around CE 1130, who wrote most extensively about Patrick, putting a Catholic spin on this Celtic priest. He ignored much of what was already known and inserted a Catholic background into the story. So, if Patrick wasn't a Roman Catholic, what did he teach? Now, this is where it gets interesting. In 596, long after Patrick's time, Pope Gregory sent a group of monks to Britain and Ireland to try to bring the Celtic Church under the authority of Rome. And of course, to get them to send their taxes to Rome, which is what the whole thing is all about. However, the Celts refused to acknowledge Gregory's authority and rejected his teachings and those of the Roman Catholic Church. In Ireland, the Celtic Church permitted their priests to marry. They also practiced baptism by full immersion in water. The Celtic Church also rejected the doctrine of papal infallibility and veneration. Basically, they were putting two fingers up to the Pope. They rejected transubstantiation, the confessional, the Mass, the worship of relics, image adoration, and the primacy of Peter. These were all specific Roman Catholic doctrines that the Celtic Church knew were not taught in the scriptures. Patrick also rejected the merging of church and state, which the Catholics were pushing for. The Celtic Church had local ecclesiastic councils, and they kept Saturday as their day of rest. So now we know who Patrick was and what he stood for. We need to ask one question. Why did he want the Irish pagans to believe the same as he believed? Was he really that insecure in his own beliefs that he felt threatened by other religions? It weren't just him, of course. The Catholic Church was created as an extension of the Roman state. When the state could no longer afford to keep a standing army in the provinces, they sent in the church to collect their taxes and send them back to Rome. That's what it's all about. It's all about money, 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 money. Patrick had been Catholic before he formed his breakaway Celtic Church. So he'd already been brainwashed into the doctrine that only Christians go to heaven. He probably actually thought genuinely that he was saving pagan souls. Mad delusional fool. Or maybe not, maybe he just saw the wisdom of the business model. Create more customers who would then give their money to the church. And by forming his own breakaway church, he didn't have to share it with the Vatican. He could keep all the dosh for himself. God, what genius. This is probably why the Vatican was so cross with him. And they didn't care what he believed. I imagine for a minute they gave monkeys what he believed. They only cared that he wasn't sharing his dosh with his loot with them. The only other religion which is so greedy is Islam. And they too are not above using violence as a recruiting tool, converting by the sword. We've heard stories of the early Christians because, I mean, the cross wasn't their symbol. The early Christians, the fish was their symbol. We've heard stories about them painting a fish on their houses and then burning down all the houses that didn't have fishes painted on them. Yeah, I mean, they were pretty aggressive. Hinduism, Sikhism, Taoism, paganism, Judaism, they don't care what other people believe. They only care about what they believe and in living their best life, living their highest ideals. They know that there are many paths up the mountain, many paths to enlightenment. And the only people wasting time are the ones running around the mountain, telling everybody else they're on the wrong path. I always say that all tolerant paths lead to enlightenment. Right, well, that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with another show. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do, or on Rumble, please do like, share, and subscribe. It helps us get out to more people. Namaste.